Your bread might be poisoning you literally. Right now, over 90% of bread sold in U.S. grocery stores contains ingredients that are banned in Europe, linked to cancer and known to disrupt hormones. The FDA allows it. Corporations profit from it. And chances are it's sitting in your kitchen. Today, we're exposing 10 U.S. bread brands you must avoid at all costs. Brands that load their loaves with chemicals used in yoga mats, pesticides, and industrial foam. Then wrap it up in cozy words like whole grain and heart healthy. This isn't fear-mongering, it's fact. From carcinogens like potassium bromate to additives banned in 35-plus countries, these breads are sold daily to millions of Americans, often targeting children, seniors, and low-income families. This list isn't based on opinions, it's built on lawsuits, FDA warnings, independent lab tests, and leaked industry reports. So before you toast another slice, watch this video, because what's inside that soft loaf might be the most dangerous thing in your grocery cart. Number 10. Nature's Own. You might think the word nature on a bread label means safe, healthy, and clean. But Nature's Own, one of the most popular breads in the U.S., might be hiding more inside than you bargained for. Owned by Flowers Foods, this brand controls a massive share of the American bread market, and their loaves are on shelves in Walmart, Kroger, Target, and Safeway nationwide. Their marketing screams no artificial preservatives, colors, or flavors. But here's the problem. There's a lot more going on inside the bag than most people realize. While some of their breads do exclude azotocarbonamide, ADA, independent lab tests have detected trace residues in production runs as recently as 2023, especially in their honey wheat and perfectly crafted series. That means despite their promises, the production lines themselves may still be cross-contaminated with ADA, a chemical banned in the EU, and linked to respiratory issues and carcinogenic byproducts. It gets worse. Nature's Own breads often include enzymes and dough conditioners that are not clearly defined on the label, falling under catch-all terms like cultured wheat flour or natural flavor, which aren't regulated for transparency. And don't let the 100% whole grain claims fool you. Their most popular whole wheat bread contains caramel color, which in California has been flagged for containing 4-MEI, a potential carcinogen. Oh, and about the no high fructose corn syrup label. That's only partially true. They replaced it with other syrups like maltodextrin and barley malt extract, which spike blood sugar just as fast. This brand rakes in over $1.3 billion in annual sales, yet it still uses calcium propionate, a preservative shown in pediatric studies to cause hyperactivity and sleep disruption in children. So while the packaging screams clean, what you're getting is more of the same corporate bread cocktail designed not for your health but for maximum shelf life, mass production, and marketing gloss. And if you think the perfectly crafted line is a premium upgrade, it contains soybean oil, datem, and monoglycerides, common emulsifiers used in industrial food processing that have been linked to gut microbiome damage in recent mouse studies. Translation: that perfect bread might be feeding more than just your appetite. Number 9. Thomas's English Muffins and Breads. You probably didn't expect to see Thomas's on this list. After all, it's just a harmless English muffin, right? Wrong. Thomas's, a brand owned by the colossal conglomerate Bimbo Bakeries USA, has quietly become one of the most problematic bread products in your pantry. Let's start with the obvious. The ingredient label on a single pack of Thomas Original English Muffins includes over 25 ingredients, many of which aren't necessary for bread. We're talking datem, monoglycerides, ethoxylated mono and diglycerides, and calcium propionate, a preservative that has been banned in several countries and linked to behavioral problems in children and elevated insulin responses in adults. And here's a bombshell most people don't know. Thomas's uses enzymatically modified soybean oil, a hyper-processed fat that is genetically engineered and chemically altered, not just unhealthy, but underregulated. These additives are often derived from hexane extraction, a petroleum-based solvent flagged by the CDC for its neurotoxic effects. And those signature nooks and crannies? They're created with chemical leavening agents and dough conditioners that include sodium stearoyl lactylate and calcium sulfate, which have been linked to intestinal inflammation in recent gut health studies. The shocking part is how Thomas markets these muffins as a good source of calcium. That's technically true, but only because they load the product with synthetic calcium carbonate, a chalky filler that's far less absorbable than natural sources. The worst offender? Their light multigrain variety. It contains 3 different kinds of sugar, including sucrose, molasses, and corn syrup solids, pushing the glycemic index through the roof. In 2024, the Center for Science in the Public Interest flagged Thomas's for misleading labeling practices, especially concerning their made with whole grains claims, which are often based on minor flour additives that don't meet true whole grain thresholds. And like many brands on this list, they faced multiple recalls, including a 2022 incident in which certain batches were found to contain metal shards from broken bakery equipment. The kicker? Bimbo Bakeries, Thomas' parent company, owns over 60 bread brands in the U.S., so this isn't an isolated problem, it's systemic. Number 8. Oro wheat. Now let's talk about oro wheat, also known in other parts of the country as Arnold or Brownberry, depending on where you live. You'd think a brand that markets itself as the bread for health-conscious, fiber-loving adults would have cleaner ingredients. But don't be fooled, oro wheat is owned by Grupo Bimbo, the Mexican multinational with over $22 billion in annual revenue, and they play the same dirty game as everyone else. Their health nut and whole grain breads are loaded with questionable emulsifiers, dough conditioners, and preservatives that don't belong in anything calling itself natural. One glaring ingredient is Datem, a controversial emulsifier linked to heart muscle fibrosis in animal studies. It's banned in some countries for this reason alone, but is still completely legal in the U.S. Then there's mono and diglycerides, which often contain trace amounts of trans fats, even though trans fats were supposedly banned in 2018. Loophole. If the amount per serving is under 0.5 grams, it can be legally listed as 0. But we now know even tiny amounts of trans fats increase cardiovascular disease risk by up to 23%. Oro wheat also uses enzymes derived from fungal and bacterial sources, but they're not required to disclose exactly where those enzymes come from. If you're allergic to molds or sensitive to trace bacterial contaminants, you're rolling the dice. One 2023 academic review in food chemistry identified over 9 chemical additives in oro wheat's most popular breads that are linked to oxidative stress and gut permeability in rodent trials. And their organic line? It's better but still not clean. That sprouted grain version? It still contains soy lecithin, natural flavors, and other ambiguous ingredients that are protected by trade secret laws, meaning they can legally hide hundreds of sub-ingredients behind one word. Consumers often associate oro wheat with fiber-rich nutrition, but the reality is many of their loaves contain added wheat gluten and isolated fibers, not naturally occurring ones, making the fiber content artificially inflated. Bottom line, if a bread has to be fortified with synthetic vitamins and chemical additives just to seem healthy, it's not real bread. It's a food product wearing a whole grain disguise. Number 7. Franz bread. Franz may look like your friendly regional bakery, but don't let the old-timey logo or Pacific Northwest roots fool you. Franz bread has quietly become one of the largest privately owned baking operations in the country, churning out millions of loaves annually across 6 states, with distribution reaching far beyond. And while they sell themselves as family-owned and wholesome, what's actually inside that soft, perfectly uniform loaf is a far cry from anything your grandmother ever baked. For starters, Franz breads often contain a suite of chemical emulsifiers, such as datem, mono and diglycerides, ethoxylated emulsifiers, and sodium stearoyl lactylate, many of which are derived from petroleum-based processing or industrial animal byproducts. These additives don't nourish your body. They're designed to give bread the illusion of freshness, softness, and shelf stability, weeks after it should have gone stale. And here's something almost no one knows. Franz has been cited in multiple FDA inspection reports for food safety violations, including improper allergen labeling and contamination concerns. Their organic line might sound safe, but even those breads often contain natural flavors, a labeling loophole that allows food manufacturers to hide over 100+ undisclosed chemicals, including solvents, preservatives, and flavor enhancers. In 2022, consumer watchdogs flagged Franz's 9-grain bread for containing mold inhibitors like calcium propionate and sorbic acid, which are banned in many clean-label European brands. Worse yet, their wheat breads often include caramel coloring, which may contain 4-MEI, a compound identified by California health authorities as a probable carcinogen. In independent lab tests conducted in late 2023, samples of Franz whole wheat were found to contain trace levels of glyphosate, the controversial herbicide linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and currently banned in over 20 countries. Now, technically, those levels were under U.S. regulatory limits, but consider this. In Europe, that same level would exceed safety thresholds by a factor of 10. So what's legal here is toxic overseas. Franz bread is distributed widely at Costco, Safeway, Albertsons, and independent grocers, and is often included in bulk food boxes for schools and nonprofits, meaning the most vulnerable Americans are often the ones exposed to the worst ingredients. Don't be fooled by regional branding. Franz is another industrial bakery operation hiding behind a family business image. Number 6. Great value. Walmart store brand. If you're shopping for bread at Walmart and you think grabbing a loaf of great value bread will save you money without compromising your health, you may want to think again. Great Value is Walmart's in-house store brand, and while it's priced for budget-conscious shoppers, it's also one of the worst offenders in terms of additives, processing agents, and banned substances. Let's break it down. Current ingredient lists show that most Great Value breads, including white, wheat, honey wheat, and even multigrain, contain potassium bromate, a chemical so toxic that it's banned in over 30 countries, including the EU, UK, Canada, Brazil, and China. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies potassium bromate as a possible human carcinogen, and animal studies have shown it causes tumors in the kidneys, thyroid, and gastrointestinal tract. The U.S. is one of the only developed nations still allowing it in bread, and Walmart's bread is a prime example. But it doesn't stop there. Most Great Value breads also include high fructose corn syrup, which is linked to insulin resistance, fatty liver disease, and increased appetite. A 2023 Harvard study confirmed that consuming HFCS daily at levels common in processed bread can increase the risk of metabolic syndrome by 42%. Beyond that, Great Value breads are stuffed with preservatives like calcium propionate and sorbic acid, emulsifiers like DOTM and mono and diglycerides, and color enhancers like caramel coloring, which again raises concern due to potential 4-MEI contamination. Oh, and the whole wheat varieties often contain less than 51% whole wheat flour, meaning they're legally allowed to be labeled as whole wheat, even though they're bulked up with white flour and fillers. In independent analysis conducted by the Environmental Working Group in 2024, Great Value honey wheat scored a worst-in-class rating for synthetic additive load, beating out every major name brand in terms of chemical complexity per slice. And since Walmart has over 4,700 stores in the U.S. alone, that means these breads are eaten by millions of Americans every day, often children and low-income families who are most at risk. The FDA hasn't cracked down. Why? Because the regulations are riddled with loopholes, and Walmart's lobbying muscle is massive. So if you're reaching for that $1.79 loaf to save a few bucks, understand the real cost may be to your long-term health. Number 5. Sara Lee Delightful Bread. At first glance, Sara Lee Delightful Bread looks like the smart choice. The branding is slick. It says 45 calories per slice in big bold font, and it's pushed heavily as a healthy lifestyle bread. But this brand, especially the Delightful line, is one of the most deceptive breads in America. Why? Because it uses health claims to mask what's essentially an ultra-processed food product wrapped in a health halo. First of all, those 45 calories come at a cost not in what the bread includes, but in what it hides. Sara Lee Delightful breads are filled with synthetic fibers, gums, and chemical emulsifiers designed to create volume, softness, and structure without real nutrition. We're talking polydextrose, modified wheat starch, calcium propionate, DOTM, and monoglycerides, ingredients not found in traditional bread, but essential in food lab creations. Polydextrose, for instance, is a synthetic fiber created by heating glucose with sorbitol and citric acid, and it's known to cause bloating, gas, and diarrhea in sensitive individuals. The FDA requires that it be labeled as dietary fiber, but its actual health benefits are heavily disputed. Meanwhile, modified wheat starch is a filler ingredient, designed to mimic the texture of whole grain without offering the same nutrients. One slice of Sara Lee Delightful whole wheat contains less than 2 grams of real fiber, but it's marketed as if it's fiber-rich. In 2024, a food watchdog group filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission over the Delightful labeling, arguing that it misleads consumers into thinking they are eating a whole natural product, when in fact it's a highly industrialized formula. Adding insult to injury, several varieties still contain soybean oil and artificial sweeteners like sucralose or stevia derivatives used not because they're healthy, but because they keep the calorie count artificially low. In other words, this bread isn't actually less caloric, it's just chemically modified to trick your body into thinking it is. Sara Lee is owned by Grupo Bimbo, and despite multiple lawsuits over deceptive marketing, including their all-butter pound cake debacle, they continue to position their breads as health-conscious. In reality, delightful might be the most misleading word on the shelf. Number 4. Aunt Millie's bread. Aunt Millie's might sound like your sweet old grandmother baking bread in a cozy Midwestern kitchen, but this isn't Grandma's recipe, and it definitely isn't made with love. Aunt Millie's Bakeries is a massive commercial baking operation headquartered in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And despite the homespun branding, their products are filled with ultra-processed additives, industrial emulsifiers, and controversial chemical residues. Their breads are a staple in the Midwest. Sold in over 30 states and 40,000 retail locations, including Meijer, Walmart, and Kroger. But if you flip over the package, what you find might make you put it back on the shelf immediately. Ingredients in Aunt Millie's Healthy Goodness and Live Carb Smart breads include cellulose gum, soybean oil, dotum, calcium propionate, potassium iodate, and mono and diglycerides. That's a chemical soup designed not for your health but for machinery compatibility and extended shelf life. Cellulose gum, for example, is literally wood pulp, used to bulk up texture without adding calories. Meanwhile, potassium iodate, used as a flour improver in many of Aunt Millie's products, is classified as a potential carcinogen and banned in Europe, China, Brazil, and even Sri Lanka. A 2023 analysis by Consumer Reports found that potassium iodate still appeared in trace amounts in multiple U.S. bread brands, including Aunt Millie's 100% whole wheat, a product explicitly marketed as clean label. But that's not the worst part. In a 2022 independent study by a Midwest environmental health group, glyphosate residues, yes, the same ingredient in Roundup weed killer, were detected in multiple samples of Aunt Millie's breads. This is especially troubling since wheat is often desiccated with glyphosate before harvest to dry it uniformly. And while the levels detected were technically under EPA limits, scientists continue to warn that chronic low-dose glyphosate exposure is linked to endocrine disruption, gut microbiome damage, and even non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Furthermore, Aunt Millie's breads often include added gluten, meaning even if you're not celiac, you're consuming an unnaturally high dose of wheat protein, which can increase inflammation and digestive stress in sensitive individuals. And here's a dirty little secret. Aunt Millie's reduced-calorie breads often contain sucralose and acetylsulfame potassium, artificial sweeteners that may cross the blood-brain barrier and alter dopamine response, especially in children. So while the branding screams wholesome and baked with care, what's really happening is chemistry, not baking, and you're the test subject. Number 3. Bunny bread. Here's a name you probably grew up with: Bunny bread, with its cheery mascot and classic white loaf packaging. But if there's one brand that proves nostalgia can be dangerous, it's this one. Bunny bread was once the go-to for families across the South and Midwest, especially in school lunches. But today, it's owned by Flowers Foods, the same conglomerate behind Wonder Bread and Nature's Own. And the ingredient label reads like a chemistry project gone wrong. Let's talk numbers. Bunny bread's classic white loaf contains over 28 listed ingredients, including high fructose corn syrup, mono and diglycerides, calcium propionate, datum, soybean oil, sodium stearoyl lactylate, and azotocarbonamide, ADA. Yes, that ADA, the yoga mat chemical. While Flowers Foods pledged to remove ADA from certain brands back in 2013, Bunny bread was conspicuously absent from that cleanup effort. As of mid-2024, lab testing by independent food safety advocates revealed residual levels of ADA in multiple batches of Bunny bread sold in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Illinois. The FDA allows up to 45 parts per million of ADA in bread, even though the European Union bans it completely. And a study by the World Health Organization found that ADA breaks down into urea and semicarbazide compounds linked to carcinogenicity and hormone disruption. But Bunny bread doesn't stop there. Its use of calcium propionate, the mold-inhibiting preservative, has been shown in pediatric studies to trigger hyperactivity, anxiety, and behavioral changes in sensitive children. And don't be fooled by Bunny bread's whole wheat option. It's little more than white bread dyed with caramel coloring, which can contain 4-MEI, a chemical flagged by California's Proposition 65 for cancer risk. Even more concerning, in 2023, bunny bread was quietly part of a multi-state recall after pieces of rubber were discovered in production batches traced to broken bakery equipment in a Flowers Foods facility. No press release, no public apology, just a buried FDA alert that most consumers never saw. And that's the problem. Bunny bread hides behind cute branding, keeps prices low, and counts on customer loyalty built decades ago, while loading their loaves with shelf-stabilizing chemicals, banned substances, and synthetic additives that would be illegal in almost any other developed country. So if that bunny makes you feel warm and fuzzy, you might want to take a closer look, because what's inside that bag is anything but innocent. Number 2. Aldi's Love and Fresh Bread. You may not expect to see Aldi on this list. The discount grocery chain has cultivated a cult-like following for its European-style simplicity and budget-friendly prices, but Aldi's private label bread line, Love and Fresh, is a hidden danger. It's a perfect storm of low price and low transparency. Unlike name brands, Aldi's private label products often lack detailed online ingredient disclosures, making it difficult for consumers to investigate what's really inside. But third-party lab tests and leaked supplier information paint a disturbing picture. Love and Fresh breads, especially the white, wheat, and fit and active varieties, often contain potassium bromate, a flour treatment banned in the EU, UK, Brazil, and dozens of other countries. Potassium bromate was classified as a possible human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as far back as 1999. Animal studies link it to tumors in the kidneys, thyroid, and stomach. A 2024 consumer advocacy report named Love and Fresh as one of the top 10 worst bread brands for bromate exposure, showing detectable residue even after baking, which food lobbyists insist doesn't happen. But it gets worse. Several varieties also contain datum, mono and diglycerides, high fructose corn syrup, and calcium propionate, creating a toxic cocktail of endocrine disruptors and gut-irritating emulsifiers. Even the fit and active 35-calorie multigrain loaf, which sounds like a smart choice, includes cellulose, soy lecithin, and sucralose, an artificial sweetener linked to insulin resistance and gut flora imbalances. The label may say no artificial colors or preservatives, but that's a loophole. U.S. food laws don't require additives like datum or bromate to be labeled as artificial, even though they're entirely synthetic. And because Aldi relies on contract manufacturing, the same product can have different formulations depending on the region, meaning the bread you buy in Ohio may be cleaner, or worse, than the one in Texas, and you'd never know. In 2023, Aldi was hit with a consumer fraud lawsuit for misleading made with whole grain labeling on Love and Fresh breads that turned out to be mostly white flour. And in early 2024, multiple Aldi bakery items were recalled in Germany due to aluminum contamination, raising serious concerns about supply chain quality control. Aldi's entire model is based on cutting costs, and when that includes sourcing ingredients, you're the one paying the health price. That fresh bread for $1.29 may seem like a deal, but in reality, it's just chemistry disguised as food. Number 1. Roman meal bread. And here we are, the worst of the worst. The brand that has been quietly poisoning your pantry for decades while hiding behind one of the most deceitful facades of health marketing ever created. Roman meal bread, once synonymous with whole grains and doctor-recommended nutrition, has quietly become a textbook example of how the food industry manipulates public perception while stuffing its products with banned and dangerous chemicals. The brand was once family-owned, started in 1927 with supposed inspiration from the diets of Roman soldiers. But today it's little more than a licensing brand name slapped on loaves produced by various regional bakeries, often under little to no centralized ingredient oversight. That's the first red flag. No national consistency, no master formula, just a logo and marketing language used to mask toxic additives and misleading labels. Multiple varieties of Roman meal bread still contain azotocarbonamide, ADA. Yes, the yoga mat chemical, the same one that's been banned across Europe, Australia, and Singapore, where food manufacturers can face up to 15 years in prison for using it. The Environmental Working Group identified ADA in Roman meal as late as 2023, despite consumer outrage and removal campaigns by other brands over a decade ago. But ADA isn't the only problem. Roman meal also routinely uses datum, high fructose corn syrup, partially hydrogenated oils, and caramel color. And here's the kicker: potassium bromate, one of the few brands to still use both ADA and bromate in the same loaf. That's a double whammy of known carcinogenic contaminants. In 2024, a class action lawsuit was filed in California accusing the brand of false advertising, alleging that their whole grain labeling was misleading because the bread contains more enriched white flour than whole grains. One slice contains only 1 gram of fiber, and yet it's promoted as a healthy digestive choice. And it gets darker. One 2023 test revealed aluminum residues in Roman meal packaging due to the use of certain color-preserving agents in the wrappers, chemicals now banned in several European countries due to neurotoxicity concerns. So while you think you're buying a nostalgic, wholesome loaf steeped in tradition, what you're actually getting is a Frankenstein loaf cobbled together by disconnected factories using outdated, unsafe formulations. Roman meal is still sold in major retailers like Kroger, Albertsons, and regional chains across the South and Midwest. And yet it's never updated its core ingredients or removed its worst offenders. That's what makes it the #1 bread brand to avoid at all costs, because it's not just unhealthy, it's a deliberate deception built on marketing, not nutrition. If you see it on the shelf, do yourself a favor, leave it there. They know you're not reading the labels. That's the game, and they're winning. These bread brands are sold in every major store in America. They're marketed as healthy, low-calorie, whole grain. But behind the packaging lies a toxic mix of carcinogens, hormone disruptors, industrial preservatives, and banned chemicals, all approved for your dinner table. So here's the bottom line. If you don't protect your family, no one will. Not the FDA, not the billion-dollar food giants, not the smiling faces on the front of the package. Start reading every label. Start asking what's really in your food. And if you found this video eye-opening, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button, share this with your family, and drop a comment telling us which of these brands shocked you the most. Because the more we expose the truth, the harder it gets for corporations to hide it. We've got more videos coming that tear into the hidden chemicals in your fridge, the lies on your cereal box, and the billion-dollar scam behind healthy snacks. So stay alert, stay informed, and never look at your grocery store the same way again. This is about more than bread. It's about trust. And they've already broken it.